A nice time to snack. Thank you. Okay, so I'd just like to take a minute and introduce this person for you who's going to teach this next class. We have been so blessed and fortunate to have her move into our region a few years ago because we are getting to benefit from her knowledge and skills and talent. She is a member of the regional faculty. She is the director of Capital City Chorus, and she is also a member of the international faculty. So please welcome, if you will, Kim Newcomb.
Yay! Hello! It's so good to see so many of your smiling faces. So today I want to talk to you about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you guys see this presentation up here? Okay, I'm seeing some nods, thumbs up. Good. Thank you for verifying that for me. So this class is called Harmony Through Harmony, which I totally borrowed from Deke Sharon. He said that a while back, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. What a great concept. So it felt fitting for this particular discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. As Kim just mentioned, my name is Kim Newcomb. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a Sweet Adelines International faculty member, a Region 4 member and director, and I like to think an ally to marginalized communities. I do have this little acknowledgement over here that I want to share with you, that I am very aware that I am a white, cis, straight, able-bodied, middle-class woman presenting about diversity, equity, inclusion. Therefore, I've consulted with several people who better represent these marginalized communities in order to present the most authentic and accurate information possible. It's really, 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 really important to center these marginalized voices when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and to believe their lived experiences and perspectives around this stuff. So my goal is really to just serve as an amplifier for what they are already sharing with us. I wanted to start off with a little quote by Maya Angelou that says, "I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better." I would love for us all to carry this concept throughout this class because it's just so true. Once you know better, you can do better. And it's just really important. Also, feel free to drop your thoughts or questions and stuff in the chat. I won't be monitoring it in real time as we're going through, but I can go back and answer anything that comes to your mind or questions. And I do plan on staying on a little bit later to discuss any questions that you might have. So, why is DEI integral to our organization? I want to talk about how DEI reinforces a culture of belonging, which is something that Sweet Adelines International has really made to be important. We have a mission statement, we have a vision statement, and we have 5 guiding principles, one of which is a culture of belonging, which says, we create harmony where every voice matters. We foster a culture that provides a joyful place to share our uniqueness within a global community, united in song. The 3 points that I really want you to take away from that statement is that every voice matters, we share our uniqueness, and that we are united in song. And that's kind of how this presentation is going to go. But this guiding principle can be best supported for our members who represent marginalized communities by embracing and prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Our region has a really bold, beautiful statement around DEI, and I don't know how many of you have taken the time to go look at it and read it, but if you have already, awesome. If you haven't, I'm going to read it to you right now because I think it's really important. As Harmony Heartland Region 4, we are ready to fearlessly use our voices to speak out against discrimination and injustice. We know doing this will require the hard work, trust, respect, and commitment of all of our members. As singers and artists, as barbershoppers and Sweet Adelines, it is time to do more than merely acknowledge our history of appropriation and institutional discrimination. In order to work toward these necessary changes, we resolve to do the following. We firmly believe in Black Lives Matter. We are willing and eager to engage in difficult conversations in order to better hear the voices of BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, and Persons of Color, and to implement changes where they are needed. We are committed to removing songs from our regional repertoire that have music and lyrics rooted in systems of oppression. We will encourage our members and choruses to do the same. We will continue to make strides toward more inclusive language in our educational materials and presentations at regional events. We will extend our culture of belonging to all BIPOC members, current and future, as well as those in other marginalized communities, including but not limited to our LGBTQIA+ singers, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, and asexual singers and friends. And we want everyone who sings on our risers or sits in our audiences to feel welcomed and included. Our region welcomes women and those of other marginalized genders to sing with us, no matter your age, race, cultural or ethnic background, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, size, gender identity, or voice part. There is a place for you in Harmony Heartland Region 4. Now that is a beautiful, big statement. And in order to really back that up, we have to be willing to do the work at all levels, right? At international, at the regional level, in our choruses, in our quartets, as an individual. It's all going to take the time to do the work, which we boldly stated that we would do. So I would like to just take a moment to define what DEI is. Now, I broke it up and provided the dictionary definitions and then also some context, because we've heard DEI a lot, right? It's come up in many scenarios recently, and I think it's really important to understand what exactly we're talking about. So the D of DEI stands for diversity, which the technical definition is the practice of including people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, etc. Now, the context for this is that diversity must exist for more than just the purpose of promotion. I don't think that that's generally the intention behind why we advertise diversity, but I think that it's kind of a byproduct of not having much diversity. Without intentional DEI work, our marginalized members may feel used. And if diversity exists without equity or inclusion, it's simply tokenism, which I have a slide for later, so you'll hear more about that. Equity, very simple, simple dictionary definition, the state of being equal. The context for us is that just saying everyone is equal doesn't make it so. Equity is the goal, but to get there, we have to do the work of breaking down our unconscious biases and helping each other to illuminate our blind spots. This means that we need to listen to our marginalized members, ask them for their advice, and put it into practice. I know that the way I walk through the world as a straight white woman is going to be different from someone who is a part of a marginalized community. There are things I don't experience or know about just because of those characteristics that I have. And so the only way I can know about those is by listening to someone who has lived with those experiences. Lastly, the I in DEI stands for inclusion. The action or state of including or of being included within a group or structure. Makes sense, right? For us, that means we want everyone to feel included. As we work towards a new understanding of what true inclusion means, we may have to sit with some discomfort that comes along with no longer being the centered perspective. So for the longest time, we have centered ourselves. I say we, as in I'm a white woman, a white straight woman, all of those things that I listed before. I fall into the majority for a lot of things, except for male versus female, right? That is, I'm in the minority, so to speak. But the longer that we are no longer centered when we do all of this work, it's going to feel uncomfortable because we've never really experienced that before. And that's okay. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. I found this little comic. It's not comedic, but that sort of serves as a visual representation talking about equity and equality. So if you look at the top left-hand quadrant, it says inequality. You see two kids, one in red overalls, one in blue overalls. The one in red overalls has the tree leaning towards them. There are more apples over there and it's falling. And this other one in the blue overalls is like, what's happening? I don't get any apples, and that's sad. Equality is when you evenly distribute tools and assistance, right? But it's the same tools and the same assistance. Unfortunately, in this particular instance, this ladder is not tall enough. It doesn't really help, even though they're getting the same tools as everyone else. Equity comes from customizing those tools. It doesn't matter that everyone gets the same thing. It matters that everyone gets what they need, right? So on this side, we have a taller ladder, and he can reach the fewer apples that are on the side of the tree. But the ultimate level that I think we're all striving for is to really create an environment for justice, which is fixing the system to offer equal access, both tools for both tools and opportunities. So instead of, just accepting that this tree is always going to exist like this, let's help it grow even better and have equal access to all sorts of things. So just a visual representation. How does DEI reinforce a culture of belonging? So I think that DEI is integral to what we want to accomplish as an organization because of the guiding principle of a culture of belonging. So a couple of the ways that this does that is because it forces us to think about the perspectives of others so that every voice can truly be heard. The majority of our members are not a part of these marginalized communities, so there are likely large blind spots in our understanding of what it means to walk through the world as part of these marginalized communities. So I have a couple of questions to get your brain thinking, to get you thinking about what you experience. How often do you consume media created, directed, or produced by a person from a marginalized community? I know that I love TikTok. It is a place that I go to kill some time and also learn lots of things. I very intentionally followed a lot of Black creators and members of the LGBTQ creators, just to learn and hear different perspectives, different experiences. How often do you read literature that wasn't written by an old white man? I know in music education, we're taught that you're supposed to teach the canon of like all of these really well-known white male composers, and yet we're missing out on so much beautiful music that was composed by other people because we decide to focus on just this lens of music or media or whatever it is. And lastly, do you ever spend time conversing with people who grew up in a different country or believe a different religion or lack thereof, or have experienced extreme hardships in ways that you haven't before? How often are you interacting and truly learning about the way other people experience life? Or are we constantly thinking that we're the main character and that is what most matters? Another way that DEI reinforces a culture of belonging is that it helps us appreciate our members for all of who they are. It allows our members to bring down their walls, because if they feel safe and seen, they will share their whole authentic selves with us. But if they do not feel safe and seen, we miss out on the opportunity to enrich our barbershop community with the beautiful uniqueness, harkening back to that culture of belonging of each individual, because we're forcing them to kind of conform to the norms that are already established. That could be in a lot of different ways. It could be physically, by asking all of our members to wear exactly the same thing, even though all of our bodies are different. It could be not a physical, tangible thing as well. And lastly, by having the hard conversations and working through the discomfort that we have, we allow ourselves to connect with each other in a truly authentic way. The trust and camaraderie that comes from this work creates an environment for our music to transcend storytelling, and instead our music becomes a vessel for true positive change in the world. Music is powerful. It's even more powerful when we create an environment where people feel safe and that they can share those things. Besides DEI reinforcing a culture of belonging, why else is this important? I think it's important because the world is changing and it's growing. DEI work is becoming required more frequently in the workplace. I know a lot of my friends are talking about how they are having discussions or prompts where they get to share things with people, and it sort of facilitates beautiful discussion around these topics. Also, younger generations are embracing and celebrating their individuality. I grew up being told you can be anything you want to be and you can do anything you want to do. And so now people are growing up and being everything that they are authentically because they feel more safe to say, I am, not heterosexual or not whatever the norm is, right? And so younger generations are embracing that, and therefore we need to cultivate an environment where they feel safe, or else they're not going to be here. Mental and emotional health are being prioritized. I don't know if you guys have been watching the Olympics and saw all of the stuff around mental health and being able to take time for yourself, because mental health is just as important as physical health, but it's being prioritized. Therefore, we must cultivate a safe and welcoming environment for all, or these marginalized communities will continue to be minimally represented or absent from our ensembles. If people don't feel safe, why would they choose to spend their time here, right? The second part of this presentation is I wanted to talk about what keeps us apart. And I borrowed this concept from the Halo Quartet as a part of the Race and Real Talk series that I got to participate in. If you don't know who they are, I'll talk a little bit more about them later. They're awesome. They are providing wonderful safe spaces to talk about these really challenging conversations or topics in conversation. But this next section is all about what has led us to the necessity of DEI work. Why is this important? So before we talk about systemic oppression, which I know can be kind of a buzzword, maybe brings up some feelings for lots of different people, I want to define some terms for you that I'm going to refer to later in this section. So first one is systemic. This just means relating to a system. So if I talk about systemic racism, I'm talking about a system that has racism embedded in it, not necessarily that you as an individual are racist or I as an individual am racist. Oppression is prolonged or unjust treatment or control. Pretty straightforward. Discrimination is the unjust treatment of different categories of people, especially on the grounds of race, age, or sex. A microaggression, if you haven't heard that term before, we're going to talk a lot about it in the coming slides, is a statement, action, or incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against a member or marginalized group, such as racial or ethnic minority. Statement, action, or incident, just a little baby thing, a microaggression. And then I have a couple of acronyms down here that I wanted to tell you what they stand for. BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And the LGBTQ plus stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. There are more letters in that acronym, but for the purposes of the remainder of this presentation, we'll be using that. So, but I want to do something. Everyone repeat after me. LGBTQ. Ready, go. LGBTQ. Say it again. LGBTQ. One more time. LGBTQ. There you go. I hear so many people say, there's just so many letters. I can't get, you can do it. You memorize a whole entire songs. I believe in you. LGBTQ, you got that. So first thing I want to talk about is systemic sexism. And there's a reason for that. I know that everyone in Sweet Adelines who is a member is feminine presenting, and therefore we have to deal with, not everyone, the majority of our members in Sweet Adelines are feminine presenting. And so I wanted to talk about sexism a little bit. Sexism and microaggressions within sexism look like if you're just existing in a crowded space and then you're touched on the lower back as a man walks by, like they think they can touch you and move you. That has happened to me before. I don't like it. It makes me feel uncomfortable. Things like catcalling or being objectified, or you're wearing a low-cut blouse and someone decides to look at you and you're like, hey, I have important things to say. Pay attention to me. Having to prove your worth, intelligence, anything like that in cases where a man would just be taken at his word. Another microaggression might be it being assumed that you're in the wrong place when showing up in a male-dominated field for things like programming or a science job, being interrupted or mansplained to, being told how to behave, like smile more, because our inherent value is in how we look, which is not true, but that's the way the world perceives us, right? So we get told to smile more, make sure you got your hair done up and all your makeup on and you're presentable for the world. Whereas you're actually presentable just as you are. You don't need to do anything, but society has told us different. So those are some examples of microaggressions. Some systemic discrimination looks like dress codes in school, dress codes that say young girls aren't allowed to wear spaghetti straps. And the reason for that is because men or boys are sexualizing their bodies when in fact they're just existing. The gender pay gap, there's a lot of articles and stuff talking about how women sometimes get paid less even though they're doing the same job. And then also a lack of political representation. I got this little emoji idea from somewhere else, but I couldn't find it again, so I made it myself. But if you look at this, and these are all the vice presidents, because we haven't had a female president, or else I would have done one for that. But these are all the vice presidents we've had since the beginning of our, American history. And all 45 before were men. That's not very representative of half of the population of our country, right? So that's a systemic issue. And the reason I wanted to talk about sexism for just a moment is because of this food for thought section at the bottom. Men don't get to decide what is or isn't sexist. Women and other marginalized genders get to decide that. I hope that you agree as, people that are a part of this marginalized side of the coin at this moment in this situation. But women and marginalized genders get to decide what is or isn't sexist. Try relating this to other systems of oppression, such as racism or ableism, as we move forward in these slides. I would love for you to use this as a way to lean into your empathy for others who are dealing with different systems of oppression. Next slide, I want to talk about systemic racism, which is unfortunately a very bad thing, but it's important to talk about. I have a little graphic in the top right-hand corner of this slide that just kind of shows the timeline of when slaves were first brought, of when enslaved people were first brought to America up until, around now-ish. Look at how much of that timeline is consumed by oppression. I mean, for hundreds of years, it was not good, right? And then we have this little sliver of green where it's like, technically segregation's not legal and technically slavery's not legal, but we're still getting over that trauma. I don't know how many of you have gone to therapy before. I've been going to therapy throughout the pandemic, and it's been life-changing and wonderful. But what I've learned is that I spent so many years believing X, Y, and Z, and those pathways in my brain are like carved out. Literally, the synapses in my brain have said, this is true, this is true, this is true for that however many years. And in order to retrain my brain to believe that I am not, incapable of something, or I am not worthy, or whatever it is, it's going to take time and dedicated effort to relearn those things for me, just like it's going to take time and dedicated effort for us to unlearn some inherent biases that are still residually here from hundreds of years of oppression. Some microaggression examples would be saying things like, you're so articulate, or where are you actually from? Because you saying you're so articulate makes it sound like you're surprised that a person of color would be able to speak, intelligently, which we assume is the way that most white people speak. Or where are you actually from? Implying that they're not from America, which is not probably true. You should just get to know them and let them share their history if they would like to. Another microaggression might be asking to touch or attempting to touch someone's hair. We do not have access to everybody's body and probably should just leave it alone, right? Another microaggression might be being passed over for a job opportunity when having a more ethnic name on a resume. There are some studies that show that if you have a typically white name like Tom or Bob, you're probably going to be more likely chosen for a job than someone who deals with, not such a white name. Some systemic examples of discrimination are things like redlining, which is being refused a loan because one lives in a poor or financial risk area. Early on, people of color weren't allowed to own property in suburban areas. This kept BIPOCs from accumulating generational wealth through owning property, and it forced communities of colors to remain in poor locations where infrastructure was not built to last or maintained by local governments, okay? So for example, the median white family income, like right now, or not right now, in 2017, I'm pulling this information from a book called The Color of Law. In 2017, the median white family income was $60,000. The median Black family income was $37,000. That's 60% as much. Now, if you look at household wealth, like where we have a lot of wealth because property is where wealth is most often, the median white household wealth is $134,000, but the median Black household wealth was $11,000. And that is a direct result from Black and Indigenous people of color being unable to own property. White families were able to pass down property and therefore generational wealth for hundreds of years before people who were not white had the opportunity to do so. So that is an example of systemic discrimination. Another one is that BIPOC are more likely to be arrested and convicted of crimes than their white counterparts. They are also more likely to receive harsher sentencing for the same crimes. You can find many articles, many studies that say this. If you want anything to back up what I'm saying here, just shoot me an email and I will find you something, a scholarly article or a peer-reviewed thing to provide that for you. And then this leads to a low likelihood. Oh, no, moving on. BIPOC are more likely to lack access to emergency medical care because hospitals they typically go to are underfunded. Also, a study found that 67% of doctors have a bias against African-American patients. Also, I've seen and heard things about how medical resources don't even show what certain rashes and things look like on darker skin. So because for so long, the lens through which we view things has been from the perspective of a white person, there are blind spots that we didn't think about, that we didn't consider, right? There's space for us to learn. Let's talk about systemic LGBTQ plus discrimination. And I separated this into two areas based on recommendations from someone that I spoke to in this community. But some general LGBTQ microaggressions might look like someone saying that LGBTQ plus people choose to be that way, or they're referring to it as a lifestyle choice, to which I would say, when did you choose to be straight? Probably never. So it's not a choice. Expecting gay men to act effeminate or expecting lesbians to act butch, which I hate even like saying that, is also a microaggression. There are heterosexual people who present feminine or masculine, regardless of what gender they were assigned at birth. And so the same is true for homosexual people. It doesn't really matter who you are interested in. That has nothing to do with how you present yourself to the world. Also, asking an LGBTQ person to share their coming out story or sexual history. Again, you wouldn't ask a straight person, like, when did you tell people you were straight? How did that go for you? You wouldn't say that to a straight person. If you wouldn't say it to a straight person, don't say it to someone as a part of this community. Some systemic discrimination examples would be like refusal to hire, rent to, or serve in a place of business, refusal to complete government paperwork. A more specific example was during the beginning of the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, the Reagan administration refused to enact any sort of action because it was thought of as a gay disease, and therefore it didn't matter until heterosexual people started dying too, and then things started happening. There's also very little representation in media, and usually when there is representation, it's vilified. Like I remember watching cartoons when I was little, and there was a cartoon I remember specifically, and the villain was never explicitly said to be LGBTQ in any way, shape, or form, but they were made, he was a male, and he was made to look feminine, function very flamboyantly, whatever your stereotype would be for that, unfortunately. And it was a villain. And I think that that's very, very sad. If you go back and watch media, you'll see that there's minimal representation and it's usually vilified. Specifically to our trans and non-binary friends in this community, some microaggressions might look like misgendering or dead naming someone. If you don't know what that means, dead naming is when you use someone's old name. So if I had a friend who was Susie and now they're Ted, and I intentionally said, yeah, Susie, blah, 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 behind their back because it was just easier for me, that would be dead naming. However, it's okay. Mistakes are going to happen. And I've never heard of anyone from this community get on someone for making a mistake. It's all about, if you make a mistake, if you misgender someone or you use their old name or you use the incorrect pronouns, whatever it is, just say, yada, 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 she, her, oh, no, he, him. You just fix it and move on. It doesn't need to be a big deal. You don't have to make a big apology about it. Just say, correct yourself and move on. You can do this. I believe in you. Intrusive questions such as, so have you gotten the surgery yet? Like if you're transitioning, surgery must be a part of your plan, but that's not always necessary. And you probably wouldn't ask a straight person, or not straight, you probably wouldn't ask anybody else such an invasive question about their body and surgery that they're doing. Another microaggression might be making offensive statements like, why do you need to be the center of attention? Which I've never known anybody who has attempted to stand up for themselves because they wanted attention. They just want to be treated like every other person, right? This is not about them. They're not trying to make a big deal out of anything. They just want to be treated like everyone else. Some systemic discrimination might look like restricting transgender women from competing in sports. There's articles on that. We can find them for you. Or being refused medical attention or resources for not having an ID that matches your paperwork. So if you get your ID to say the actual gender that you identify as, however, your medical paperwork still shows what was assigned at birth, there might be some issues there, and we need to figure out what we can do policy-wise to alleviate that challenge. Some systemic ableism and classism, just a couple other categories I wanted to throw in here because there are many, many different angles that we need to consider when we're talking about DEI, right? It's not just about race, it's about a lot of different things. Ableism is some microaggressions might look like, you don't look or you don't act disabled, you don't look deaf, you don't, whatever that is. Not every disability is going to be physically visible. So we need to assume that everyone, if they tell us they have a disability, we believe them. You don't need to minimalize it in any way. Another microaggression might be, I wish I could sit down all the time, for someone who maybe is in a wheelchair. That's like a pretty obvious one. I don't think anyone would do it, but just throwing it out there as an example. The way you overcome your disability is so inspiring. This implies that you have really low expectations for differently abled people. And I think it's also becoming more normal to talk about, instead of disability, it's like a diffability, a differently abled person, just a different way, different mindset. They accomplish the same things that we do in life. There's just a different path to get there, right? And of course, another microaggression might be mimicking someone's disabilities. Systemic discrimination looks like a lack of assistive resources and important health messages, like having Braille or large text available for people who have seeing challenges, or having subtitles for people who have hearing challenges. Some physical barriers might look like a multi-level building without ramps, elevators, or lifts. Some policy issues include discriminatory pay laws and marriage laws. So there are some people who are living with disabilities who don't get to choose who they can marry, or who can be paid below the minimum wage because of their disability, and that's unfortunate. Side note over here, saying someone has a disability or is living with a disability is seen as more respectful and humanizing than saying someone is disabled. So someone is living with blank, someone is living with, or someone has blank disability is a better way to verbalize that. And then I want to talk about classism just a little bit. Some microaggressions for classism look like assuming someone doesn't care about their appearance because of their clothing being off-brand, or maybe, not quite pressed or whatever, tattered. That doesn't mean that they don't care about their appearance. It might mean that they can't afford, name brand clothing, or assuming that someone who doesn't eat organic is lazy or doesn't care about their health. That is classism, because not everybody has access to organic produce. Not everybody has the money to go to the fancier places to purchase these things. Some systemic examples are things like poverty wages. The minimum wage right now is $7.25, which the median mortgage payment for a house, like we're just talking about housing, right now is about $1,600. If you work 40 hours a week for a month, at $7.25 an hour, you're going to make $1,160. That's not even enough to pay your mortgage. It's not enough to pay for food or travel to and from your work. It's not enough to pay for childcare if you have a child. So if you are a single parent, you're forced to live with multiple people, get a second job, never see your kid. There's all sorts of things, right? So we really do need to address poverty wages at a systemic level in order to alleviate the disparity between classes. Another example of this is the food desert, which is an urban area in which it is difficult to buy affordable or good quality fresh food. There are certain areas that there's not even a store within walking distance for you to get high quality food or even acceptable food. And if you're a person who doesn't have a car and you have to walk from your home to the grocery store and back, you might be needing to shop at gas stations or just convenience stores. And that is a symptom of not having access for all different class levels. Now I want to talk about some lived experiences because it's really time to listen. Let's see. I don't know. I think that you guys might have gone away. I'm going to stop my share and then redo my share. This is a short video. This is a short video of, where is she? Okay. Here we go. Of a woman sharing her experience while going shopping. So just take a listen. Oh no. Can you guys hear this? Nope, me either. Let's figure that out. Alrighty. Can I share? MacBook Pro. Let's see if this works. And if it doesn't, I have plenty of content to share and move on.
They're first cousins, and we,
Can you hear that?
Wonderful, very, very
Okay.
multicultural
Thank you.
family. So we're going in a safe way. My sister-in-law, who's half black, half white, but looks white, blue eyes, whiter than most white folks, very white. She and I, we kind of grew up together. We raised our children together. So they're first cousins, and we, it's a wonderful, very, very multicultural family. So we're going in a safe way one day. And Kathleen, my sister-in-law, is in front of me. And she's, writing a check for her groceries. Now, my daughter, who at the time was 10 years old, was standing with me, and I was directly behind her, getting ready to get my groceries. So Kathleen comes up, and the checker, who's a strawberry blonde, freckled, very delightful, warm, the checker, this young woman, is talking to Kathleen. Hey, how you doing? It's been a nice day today. They're just chatting up, and says, yeah. So Kathy writes her check, and she steps off to the side with her groceries because she's waiting for me. Of course, again, Kathleen looks white, right? So I come up. No conversation. She looks up at me. Absolutely no, just little chatter. And I write my check. My daughter, however, is 10. Notices immediately the difference in how she responds to me. So I write my check, and she goes, I'm going to need 2 pieces of ID. At which point, my daughter looks at me, and she gets very, very embarrassed, and tears are kind of coming up in her eye, like, Mommy, you're not gonna let her do this. Why is she doing this to us, right? So I'm trying to figure out what I should do, because behind me are 2 elderly white women, right? And I'm thinking, okay, so then I become the angry black woman, right? And they're gonna be, and I'm just trying to second guess all the drama. So then I just give her the 2 pieces of ID. I said, some things you gotta choose your battles, right? And then it gets worse. She pulls out the bad check book, right? So this is the book that shows the people who have written bad checks. So she starts searching for my license in the bad checks, at which point it's just out of control now. Just as I'm standing there trying to decide what to do, and it's really deeply humiliating. Now my daughter is in full-blown emotionally upset, who's 10. My sister-in-law walks back over. And she steps in and she says, excuse me, why are you doing this? And the checker goes, well, what do you mean? She goes, why are you taking her through all of these changes? Why are you doing that? She goes, well, this is our policy. She goes, no, it's not your policy because you didn't do that with me. Oh, well, I know you've been. She goes, no, she's been here for years. I've only lived here for 3 months. And so at this point, the two white elderly ladies go, oh, I can't believe what this checker has done with this woman. It's totally unacceptable. At which point, the manager walks over. So the manager walks over and says, is there a problem here? And then my sister-in-law again responds. She goes, yes, there is a problem here. Here is what happened. So you see, she used her white privilege. And even though Kathleen is half black and half white, she recognizes what that means. And she made the statement. She pointed out the injustice. And she, as a result of that one act, influenced everyone in that space. But what would have happened? I can't know for certain had the black woman said, this is unfair. Why are you doing this to me? Would it have had the same impact? But Kathleen knew that she walked through the world differently than I did. And she used her white privilege to educate and make right a situation that was wrong. That's what you can do every single day.
Yeah. So what a beautiful, story that wonderfully someone used. And I know that the term white privilege can also be sort of a triggering thing for many people. And I just want to say out loud that white privilege doesn't mean that if you are white, that you haven't struggled, you haven't gone through things, you haven't had to work really hard for everything you've done. It just means that you didn't have the additional barrier of racism holding you back from accomplishing those things. Now, there it is. Okay, let's go back. That's just a general experience that I wanted to share. However, the following experiences I've gathered from other Sweet Adelines or noticed over the years in Sweet Adelines events that are lived experiences that represent just these things that unfortunately pop up, right? It's more than unfortunately popping up. It's racism or ableism or homophobia or things like that, transphobia coming out in our hobby, and it's unfortunate, but we have to talk about it because if we don't talk about it, it's not going to change. So some examples of the BIPOC experience is non-white singers being put on the front row to show off diversity. Now, whether or not that was the intent, that is how it was received. And that's why it's important to be so overt in our support and activism that there's never a question about why someone is on the front row or being put somewhere, right? Another experience that was shared with me is someone getting checked in at a hotel at their first international, going up to the front desk and saying, hey, can you do blank for me? I need this to happen. And the person was like, no, I'm too busy. I can't do that. However, when her white roommate came over and asked for the exact same assistance, she immediately stopped what she was doing and walked them to accomplish whatever they asked for. The only difference was that one person was black and one person was white. It's not a good thing, right? Some examples that have come up for the LGBTQ community is a friend shared with me that when a non-binary member singer first joined a chorus for a virtual rehearsal and had their pronouns included in their name, just like some of us do right now where my name is listed and then I have them in parentheses, she, her, that is me signaling to you, hey, these are my pronouns, please use these. They were then called later after the rehearsal by the membership chair to be informed that a member really wanted them to know that this is a chorus for women. That was like someone went really out of their way to let them know that I don't know if you're welcome here. That's a really unfortunate downside. Another experience is just having to frequently sing songs without relatable pronouns. I mean, if there's anyone in your chorus who doesn't love men, and we're constantly singing and using he pronouns, and I loved him and I'll love him till the end of time, and yada, 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 they've had to live with the reality of not being able to authentically think about and perform in that manner. And I know that recently I've seen lots of conversations around people not wanting to use like gender neutral pronouns or changing words in songs to accommodate that. And I wonder if you could think about it through the lens of this group of people have been dealing with this challenge their entire Sweet Adeline career. Maybe if we can, I'm not saying go change all the pronouns in all of your songs, but I'm saying make a concerted effort to include everyone. Some examples of ableism is I know that there are some choruses that don't allow chairs in competitions. And I don't know if they've explicitly said that, but I know some underlying vibes are like, oh, we don't put people who aren't going to be able to completely physically participate on the risers. Or having performance venues chosen without access, like accessible options like a ramp or a lift to get to the stage. I've done barbershop camps where we didn't realize until the performance day that we needed to put several singers on the floor to sing with the person who is in a wheelchair, because the only other option would be carrying that person in the wheelchair up onto the stage, which is not an option. So some classism that I've seen is someone told me that at their first regional, the members were told to wear black heels on contest stage. It was a small chorus, so it was just like, wear what you got, do it. The person wore the only pair of black heels that they had because they couldn't go out and buy more. They were kind of taller than were recommended, but they were chastised the entire day to their face and behind their back about not having the correct height shoes or not having the correct kind of shoes or whatever. They were really made to feel like they didn't belong, and that's unfortunate. And then I threw in ageism in here. It's not something I really talked about, but I think it's important because our hobby it's specific to our hobby because we have so many different generations represented in our hobby, which is super cool. But younger members like me, I feel othered when people say things like, oh, you're too young to remember this or that. And the only reason I even realized that it wasn't, meant to make me feel that way is because in my talks with people about this presentation, I mentioned that, and they were like, oh, I only ever say that because I feel lesser than, I don't feel as valuable, right? So it kind of both comes from a place of, you said this and it made me feel less valuable, and someone saying like, I said this because I already don't feel very valuable. And I was fortunate enough to go to the visioning retreat a few years ago at Sweet Adeline's International Headquarters. And something we talked about there on this topic is that older members feel disposable. They don't feel like they're as valuable anymore, or they have as much to offer. But regardless of what age you are, there's always something to offer. But that's something that we experience in this particular organization because we have so many different generations represented. I want to take a moment to talk about polite conversation, because I think that we've been told there are certain subjects we just don't talk about. We don't talk about religion, we don't talk about politics, we don't talk about, whatever it is. However, this has robbed us of the skills that are required to work through tough conversations. We've been conditioned to believe that we must always share our feelings in a calm and kind manner. Actually, that's kind of a separate thing. So we've been robbed of the tools to work through tough conversations. I'm sure that we have taken the time to utilize the tools needed in really important relationships. Like if you've ever gotten into an argument with your spouse, the only way to address the issue between you and your spouse, like, you need to do the dishes more often because I feel like I'm doing it all. Really, the root of that is maybe I don't like traditional gender norms and I need you to do more work around the house because I don't want to feel like it's my responsibility. But that's a much deeper thing, and it takes a lot more conversation to get there. The same is true about these tough conversations. If we don't talk about it and we avoid it, nothing is going to change, and we can't have authentic connection from one person to another, just like you would in your relationship with your spouse. Also, we have been conditioned to believe that we must always share our feelings in a calm and kind manner in order to be considered. That is a challenging standard to hold when we're talking about things that are personal and traumatic. Just because someone shares their hurt in a heated manner does not take away the validity of their statements. I'm going to say that again. Just because someone shares their hurt in a heated manner does not take away the validity of their statements. If our allyship to marginalized communities is dependent on them not hurting our feelings, our commitment to supporting them is not strong enough. They have lived through many, many things that I have not, and therefore I don't understand their pain or hurt, just like a man can't understand why I'm so upset that I was told X, Y, or Z. So, yes, we need to always try and do our best to be kind and to articulate ourselves well. But maybe if you're not in the right headspace to do that, you can take a step back and utilize some tools I'm going to tell you about in a minute. Intersectionality. This is defined in the right-hand corner for you, but it's basically that there are certain categories people fall into that are inherently hold privilege or experience oppression. The upper half of this diagram are the groups of people that typically experience privilege. The bottom is the typical groups of people who experience oppression. And acknowledging and understand that this is kind of just the way the world is set up right now is the first step towards breaking down those norms and celebrating everyone for all of who they are. So if you look up here, like the opposite of white is people of color, and that is rooted in racism. Male versus female, that's rooted in sexism. You get the idea. But the point of this slide is that there are people who deal with more than one system of oppression, right? A white woman is only going to have to deal with sexism, and a white gay man is only going to have to deal with people's fears around homophobia, but a black woman has to deal with racism and sexism. That means her experience is going to be much different, right? Intersectionality is important to be taken into consideration as we move through these DEI topics. Last thing on what keeps us apart is tokenism. This is the practice of making only a perfunctory or symbolic effort to do a particular thing, especially by recruiting a small number of people from underrepresented groups in order to give the appearance of sexual or racial equality within a workforce, or our ensembles. For context, representation of marginalized communities is almost non-existent in our organization. Unfortunately, that's just kind of how it is right now. And therefore, sharing the minimal representation we do have can sometimes feel like tokenism. How can we avoid that? Here are 3 ways. 1, make DEI a part of your policies instead of just a checklist. Like, we need to create a cultural shift. Are you changing the verbiage in your bylaws to have inclusive language? Are you considering gender neutral pronouns before introducing new repertoire? I'm not saying go back and change everything in your old repertoire, but when you're picking stuff, are you thinking about that proactively? Is that becoming a part of your process? Don't tokenize your photos or promotional materials. Asking your BIPOC or youth members or anyone whose diversity can be physically seen to move in front for photos can feel tokenizing. Instead, maybe just make an effort to represent your real diversity organically. Those members should be treated just as any other member. If they're hanging out and participating and you take a picture, just tell them to turn and smile and they get to be there, right? Ask members who represent marginalized communities to serve in more ways than just providing feedback as a diverse member. What are they good at? Can they serve on the music team? What can you learn from them besides just their perspective in that area? Yes, we should ask for their perspective and learn from them, but they should feel valued for more than just their diversity. All right, last little topic is how harmony can bring us together. Harmony through harmony. Some tools for working through the tough stuff. We're going to talk about song assessment toolkit. That's a tangible thing for us. Exercising vulnerability, community cultivation, leaning into your strengths, and embracing the discomfort. First thing, because this is unique to our organization, I think it's wonderful, is the song assessment toolkit helps create harmony through our harmony by creating a safe space. The work that's being done is to remove racially offensive songs from our repertoire is helping us to create a safe and welcoming environment for our members and our audiences. We're creating a safe space. Also, doing the research. I don't know how many of you have gone through the process of working through the song assessment toolkit, but it's a long process. You got to answer lots of questions. You learn lots of things, right? This research that's required in the process allows us to find out why things are offensive, whether it be romanticizing the horrific realities that existed in our past or perpetuating harmful stereotypes such as the lazy black man or the angry black woman. Those are hurtful, harmful stereotypes that still pop up in some of those old songs that contribute to our unconscious biases, right? The last thing I want to say, and I think that it's a good point for this work, is that even though this tool is doing a great job at helping to remove racially offensive content, it's not currently being used to address other offensive, problematic content in regards to the LGBTQ community. I'm sure you guys have seen conversations happening on Facebook talking about it, but I think this is a great moment to point out that this is a good example of 2 conflicting ideas. Like, we can celebrate the things that we're doing to move forward, like, yay, it's doing good, and we can still hold each other accountable that there's continued work, there's continued improvement that we need to work towards, right? Those 2 things can be true at the same time. Next point is exercising vulnerability. as musicians, as singers, we have the unique experience of making music with words. And this allows us to play with vulnerable spaces as we attempt to share music through stories. I know you guys have had coaches that come in and they're like, close your eyes, think about a time that yada, 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 right? They get you in that space. You got to be vulnerable to open up yourself and share the story, use yourself as a vessel for the story, right? So you have practice being vulnerable. You have practice in life being vulnerable. It's likely that we've all had some experience where we've allowed ourselves to feel allowed ourselves to be vulnerable. And it usually feels hard and scary at first, but the more you live there, the easier it gets. And the same is true for this work. It feels hard and scary at first, but the more you live there, give yourself grace, give your people you're talking to grace, the easier it's going to get. So try looking at the vulnerability practice you have had in your life and music as a way to let yourself know that you can lean into that skill to work through these tough conversations. It's so much harder to be vulnerable and honest and true than it is to put up your walls and get defensive about things. Another way we are doing harmony through harmony is by community cultivation. Now, Speed Outlines International provides an outlet for lifelong music learning. We've all taken music in school, but then most people leave and realize that their musical community has vanished. And we really do have lots to offer, right? However, to be very honest, my experience of SAI Ensemble so far is that we aren't really representative of the communities that we are in, right? There's very little diversity represented in our choruses, but if you look at your local demographics, you can see plenty of diversity. So what might be the reason for this lack of diversity? I would argue that it's the difference between feeling welcomed and feeling valued. I think we do a really good job of welcoming people onto the risers, but if there isn't someone up there that looks like them, or if it isn't obvious that all of who they are is valued there, they might not return. We must be overtly proactive in our allyship because neutrality helps the oppressor, never the oppressed, right? If we remain neutral, if we don't show our support in a big way, they're probably going to assume that we aren't willing to fight for them, but we are. And at least I am, and I hope you are too. I want to talk about leaning into your strengths, and there's a picture of Halo Quartet up here because I love them and they are inspirational and they are wonderful. If you don't know who they are, you got to get involved with them somehow. But they hosted a series called Race and Real Talk over the last year of the pandemic, and I signed up, and it was a transformative experience. Something that came out of the conversations as a part of that series was many ways to contribute to these efforts, right? We all have the capacity to contribute to this journey in different ways. Some by being an educator, being a one-on-one relationship builder, a space holder, amplifiers. There's so much more. But the three I want to focus on are educators. These are the people that we most need to learn from and are the ones who have those lived experiences. The educators are the best people to educate on, what sexism is going to be women and marginalized communities, right? The best people to educate on what racism really is going to be not white people because we are in the majority and that's how society is. Although the responsibility cannot solely fall onto them to educate us. We need to do the work, we need to seek out, we need to ask questions. And if they are willing to partake and participate, that's really great and wonderful. Second thing is space holders. Space holders help to create an environment where it is safe to share. Holding space for someone means being physically, mentally, and emotionally present for them. We don't always have the capacity to do this though, but if we do, we should. So I can hold space for my white friend who says something that I know they didn't intentionally mean to sound racist, but maybe it kind of was. I can hold space and be calm and be like, hey, I don't think you meant that, but this is how it came off. Let's talk about that. But I wouldn't expect someone who has, someone who isn't white to act as calmly as I might in that situation. You can be a space holder in different ways, and we won't always have the capacity to do it. So if you don't and you need a break, that's okay, as long as we're all contributing. And the last one I want to point out is an amplifier, which is exactly what I'm hoping that I'm doing right now, is to amplify the voices that need to be heard. We have to center people who have these lived experiences of oppression so that we can learn from them. I don't know enough about what it's like to be discriminated against because of my skin color, because that doesn't happen to me because I'm white. I get other things that I have to deal with. And the last one, I think, as a tool of harmony through harmony, but it really works outside of music too, is just embracing discomfort. Part of creating harmony involves wading through the dissonance, right? Barbershop is awesome because you build up and you build up and there's dissonance and then aha, harmony again, right? So this is kind of a process. Step 1, pause, breathe, address any physical sensations that might be coming up for you in a difficult conversation. Because if we feel threatened, if we don't feel safe, it's likely that we're functioning in our amygdala part of our brain, which is that fight, flight, or freeze part. It's going to be really hard to have a intellectual conversation around tough topics if you're just on the defense, right? So if you need to take a moment to breathe, do it. Let the person talking to you know, like, hey, I hear you. I think that in order to have a more productive conversation, I just need a moment to get out of my feels. That's okay. Say that you need a moment, pause, breathe, assess. Next, make them feel heard. Acknowledge their experiences. Just like you would want to feel heard and acknowledged, extend that first. Make the first step. I hear you. I see what you're saying. Thank you for sharing that. And don't put a but on it. Like, legit say, I hear you. I acknowledge what you're saying, even if I disagree. Third step is try to understand. Ask some clarifying questions about what the intent, and with intent of really listening. So don't be thinking about how you're going to combat, like really try to understand. That takes time, it takes effort, it takes emotional, mental capacity to do so, which is why you took some breaths earlier, right? Step 4 is to reflect. Why do I feel this way? Why do I feel offended that someone called me racist? Did they call me racist because I am racist? Or am I just happening to be a part of a system that is racist? More often than not, it's probably not. They're probably not. You being racist and being a good person are not separate. You can be a good person and unfortunately have some racist inherent biases, inherent thoughts. Like, if you walk down the street and you see a black man, do you cross the street because you don't feel safe? Would you do that same thing for a white man? Would you do that same thing for a white woman? I don't know. There are inherent things that have happened to us, and obviously some personal experiences if you have lived through some trauma. I don't feel really safe around any men, but I think I have to think about, if it's a black man that I suddenly encounter, is it because I'm afraid of men because of my own experiences, or is it because there's a racial bias that I have held on to? And need to work through and let go of. What are the root of those feelings? And the step 5 is repeat. Like, this process is never ending, you guys. We are never going to be fully aware of everything that's going on. Like, we need to continue and learn and grow our entire lives. Don't give up. It's hard work, but I promise it's worth it. I promise it's worth it. So the class is definitely over now, and these were my questions. If we had some discussion time,